So, today I'm going to be doing something a little different. Now, normally for Sean's Thoughts, as you've seen with the other things I reviewed so far while using the Sean's Thoughts branding, I'd usually cover animated shows that have yet to have completed their run, since the other series that it's connected to, Sean's Network Reviews, is primarily for shows that have completed their run. Shows like Thundercats Roar and Ollie's Pack just got particularly lucky because the initial scripts that I wrote for them were when the shows were still ongoing, and I didn't watch enough episodes to sustain a review, especially considering the fact that in my scripts for my initial reviews that I wrote for them, I didn't really have the names of the characters in my head yet, since I didn't watch those shows in their entirety at the time. But when it came up to the point where I did my initial review on Camp Coral, which only had 6 episodes at the time, I came up with this new series to do for shows that are currently airing, and my general rule is if I have more to say about the show after they completed their run, and watch through the rest of the episodes that were aired after I originally reviewed them, I'd make a follow-up review if I have new things to say. Well, today for Sean's Thoughts, I'm actually going to be doing something very different, and that I am going to be doing a Sean's Yearly Reviews video. However, it's going to be using the Sean's Thoughts branding, for an entirely different reason as to why the Sean's Network Reviews video for shows that haven't completed their run use the Sean's Thoughts branding, because, well, yes, the movies that I review for Sean's Yearly Reviews are only one movie, so you only have an hour of material to work with. At the same time, though, a lot of the movies that I reviewed for Sean's Yearly Reviews have been released on home media, digital, and are generally easy to get the materials to do a review on them. But the movie that I'm currently doing a review on is currently in theaters as of the time that I'm scripting this, and the materials are not easy to get the footage or pictures of. I could get the materials for the review through camera-recorded versions, but because I don't want to run into issues where I'm bombarded with pop-ups through a certain website in particular, I think it would be better if I do the review this way. So that way, I can basically do this review without needing to worry about getting the materials from the movie itself. And also, I don't want to let my fresh knowledge about the subject of today's review go to waste. Given that in preparations for me going into this remake, I decided to rewatch the original movie so that I had a frame of reference for what would happen in the remake, and then draw the comparisons in my head. When it comes to my thoughts on the original Lilo and Stitch movie, I think it goes without saying, this movie is not just a good movie, but also, it's a great movie that remains as one of Disney's most important animated films of all time, considering the fact that by the time that the movie came out, Disney was struggling hard financially, with films like Treasure Planet and Home on the Range doing very poorly at the box office, and the original movie did very well for a very good reason. While I don't have as much nostalgia for this movie as I did with something like The Lion King or Finding Nemo, because I remember not really getting into this movie when I was little, but I fully gave it a chance when I was 12. It remains as an endearing movie with a very touching bond between two sisters, as well as having a well-executed story, where even though, yes, the film has a lot of similarities to E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the film makes up for it with its character dynamics, beautiful scenery, a powerful message about how families should always stick together, and the film knows how to lighten up the mood whenever it does get mean. The film does know how to do this in moderation, making it to where the movie doesn't feel too harsh, as the film has tons of moments where it gets funny, as opposed to other derivative films of its kind like Monster Family or Lewis and the Aliens. However, because I don't have too much to really say about the original film, I'm not going to do a review on the original film, given that I only really talk about the films that I talked about or watched whenever there was something in them that really interested me. That's basically what I plan on doing when I get around to The Lion King 2019, where I'd rewatch the original before going into the remake to specifically talk about what works in the original versus what the remake does. So consider this review as the closest that you'd get to me doing a Sean's Yearly Reviews video on the original movie. The film gets an 8 out of 10. Not sure if it would top the SpongeBob SquarePants movie on my rankings so far, but I'd certainly say that's up there. So with that being said, because I said that the original movie gave me a reference for everything I'd go into regarding the remake, what are my thoughts on it? It's bad. And I mean really, really bad. Would I go as far as to say that it's one of the worst movies that I reviewed so far? No. I don't know if it would even make it into the top 10. Considering some of the other movies that I've talked about so far, even Lewis and the Aliens, a pale imitation of Lilo and Stitch, is a far worse movie than this film, but there are just way too many problems with this movie for me to simply ignore. And to address what comments that I might end up getting before I get them, the problem with a lot of these remakes that have been being put out by Disney, not even just from the live action side, but also with the animated Diary of a Wimpy Kid movies, is not so much the fact that they're different or exactly the same as the original but don't do anything different. The problem is that they really cannot decide whether or not they want to be like the original or if they want to stand on their own. So they try to have their cake and eat it too by throwing in a bunch of unnecessary changes that just makes the movie a lot worse. This is exactly why a show like Schnookums and Meat was so bad. It wanted to be like Ren and Stimpy so badly, but at the exact same time, it really didn't want to be like Ren and Stimpy, which in turn created this massive problem that caused the show's quality to suffer hard. The exact problem that a lot of these remakes, Lilo and Stitch 2025 included, have. Even if I've never watched the original Lilo and Stitch movie in my life, the movie would still not be good because if you look at this film from two directions, a lot of the aspects that this movie decides to do just don't work at all. The alien designs just don't translate well to live action, to the point where they ended up not using Pleakley and Jamba's designs for most of the movie, which could also explain why they apparently decided to remove Gontu from the movie, because the film was not given a big enough budget for them to basically have him be in the remake, since the film was initially supposed to be a straight-to-Disney Plus movie, but they made it a theatrical at the last second. But like The Lion King, the original movie being animated worked in its advantage because you can do so much in animation than you can do in live action. And the sister bond that this movie is trying to go for just does not feel genuine at all, because the remake made both Lilo and Nani completely flat, to the point where it just feels incredibly hollow, but when looking at it compared to the original, it becomes even worse. As the first and one of the movie's biggest problems is how they heavily butchered both Lilo and Nani. One of the original movie's major highlights, like I said, is the sister bond between Lilo and Nani, where in spite of the fact that yes, Lilo and Nani do get into fights, you do see the chemistry between both of them and how they're trying to survive after their parents end up passing away. And even beyond that, both of them have energy and charisma to the point where you can tell what personalities that they have. Lilo is the naive little girl that, even though yes, she can act out, a lot of the time, she stood as a very interesting character that a lot of people on the spectrum can relate to on a personal level, and Nani, while not as interesting, is a very supportive sister that, while yes, she does get into fights with Lilo a lot of the time, you can tell that she does all of this because she cares about Lilo, and is trying her best to make sure that she doesn't get taken away by CPS. And not gonna lie, Nani's design is absolutely wonderful. All of which is something that the remake has completely disregarded. Because the major thing that is completely missing from this remake is the passion, flavor, and love that went into Lilo and Nani as characters. Because both of the actors that are playing Lilo and Nani in the remake are just not putting their all into it for completely different reasons. Because with Nani, you don't get the feeling that she really cares about her sister very much. And if she does, the way that she's expressing it through her body language indicates something completely different. For most of the movie, she looks incredibly disinterested, as if she doesn't even want to be in the movie. Now yes, I understand that she was a bit pessimistic in the original. She was able to still show emotions throughout most of this movie, even when she's not getting actively angry. She just looks so annoyed most of the time, as if she's just about ready to wrap up the production of the movie because she was just there for a paycheck. Remember in the original film, when Nani ended up quitting her job after her boss sees Stitch attacking Pleakley? She doesn't hold it against Lilo or Stitch, since she's obviously under the presumption that Stitch isn't disciplined yet. Well, in the remake, she ends up as sounding exactly like she's blaming Lilo and Stitch for that happening, but they ended up changing it to where Stitch ends up causing a fire. And remember when she ended up bursting into tears after she found out that her sister was taken by Gontu in the original? Well, in the remake, she flat out looks like she isn't even fazed by it. Like, ma'am, your sister was kidnapped by an alien. Show some freaking emotion. And with Lilo, they kind of did the inverse of this, where even though yes, she does show more emotions than Nani, what they did to Lilo was that they completely sanitized her to the point where any traits of imperfections that she had before are completely gone now. All the remake does is that they oversell on the cuteness to the point where you could make this movie not have Stitch and have him just be a random alien and replace Lilo with, say, a random blonde girl, and you would not be able to tell that this movie was supposed to be a remake of Lilo and Stitch. Lilo was an actual character in the original movie. Her snapping at her friends at the beginning was there to show how, because she's possibly on the spectrum, she has a poor sense of impulse control than most other kids. And throughout the entirety of the movie, she's completely aware of her situation and how, because she's still grieving over the loss of her parents, it's more difficult for her to control her emotions. And like Nani, she knew how to emote with more than just happiness or the speechless look on her face. When she finds out that Stitch was an alien in the original, she gets angry before they get captured by Gontu. Here though, she just looks dumbfounded when Jamba tells her that Stitch was using her. At every other time, she's basically just cute and bubbly for the purpose of being cute and bubbly, basically the opposite of what DuckTales did with Webby. 2017 Webby is like the original Lilo, while the 2025 Lilo is basically 1987 Webby. And because they basically removed all of these edges from Lilo's character, certain motivations are completely watered down to the point where they feel incredibly safe at best and feel extremely hostile towards what the original source material did at worst, as well as taking out a lot of her quirks that made her interesting and just making her a character that is just there to emphasize the fact that she's cute and that's it. Even though being cute is not a personality. It's the exact same problem that I had with Billy from the Polar Express. Just being quiet and timid is not a personality trait. That's just something that someone is. A character trait is what they're defined as, which is why Fluttershy from MLPFIM is such an amazing character. They didn't even have Lilo be late to the hula dancer show like the original, and now they basically made it to where she's not acting out impulsively to others anymore. They made it to where Lilo is entirely justified for acting out. The first major change that they made from the original that immediately made me know what I was gonna be in for this remake is that they changed the reason as to why Lilo attacked her friend. In the original, Lilo already ran late because she basically fed a fish that she thinks controls the weather a peanut butter sandwich and messed things up because she made the stage all wet. And they also removed this reason as to why Lilo attacked her friend. Yes, the line,
"I think she's crazy,"
is still in the movie, but it's not even said directly to Lilo. The movie changed it to where the reason as to why Lilo attacked her friend was because she straight up pushed her, whilst also being heartbroken that Nani wasn't there, even though Nani wasn't even attending the hula dancing show in the original movie. And given that Lilo was possibly on the spectrum in the original movie, minor insults like being called crazy was gonna make her act out. But given that Lilo's friend pushed her, which could have gotten her seriously hurt, it's not something to simply ignore, so Lilo was justified in this movie to do this. And for Stitch, they basically decided to strip him of his development, making it to where he doesn't read the Ugly Duckling story, leading there to not be any sort of transition between him starting to become behaved after acting bad from the majority of the film. And as for the changes made to this movie compared to the original, they really do emphasize a problem that a lot of these remakes have. Like I said before, these remakes don't know whether or not they want to be the original, or if they want to do something slightly different to distinct itself from the original, almost as if these movies should just be retellings of the original films, not directly copying the animated films. That's why Charlie and the Chocolate Factory works so well. The film was trying to be a direct adaptation of the book, not like the 70s Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory film. Meanwhile, the Tom and Jerry and Willy Wonka crossover directly did everything scene by scene from the 70s film, whilst changing the most important plot points to now make it to where Charlie isn't directly responsible for his goals being complete. And that's exactly how these remakes are like. They do the exact same things from the animated counterparts, but they end up creating problems as a result by changing certain plot points, whether if it would be making the female protagonist into a girl boss, changing an alcoholic beverage into root beer, or making important plot points not work anymore. And for Lilo and Stitch, there's an entire list that I could go through, but for now, let's just stick with the major elephants in the room. They completely erased Gontu want to from the film, because Disney apparently didn't want to spend all that much money to include him, even though he's one of the most important characters in the original movie, and emphasizing this right now. You are Disney! You have billions upon billions of dollars in order to include him, and if you don't want to spend money on alien designs, don't remake Lilo and Stitch then! And they also made Jamba into the main villain and got rid of the Russian accent. Yes, Jamba was antagonistic in the original, but he eventually came around in the end of the original film. And essentially, what this movie did to Jamba is exactly what the Darkstalkers cartoon did to Morgan. And they also pushed Bubbles to the side, making him into a generic CIA agent who looks for Stitch with nothing else to do, and basically replaces his original role in the original movie with this generic social security woman. And lastly, and the worst change of them all, is how badly they messed up the message of what the original movie was trying to go for. Which leads me into the biggest problem with this movie. The film feels like it was made by someone who not only didn't like the original, but also had a massive distaste for it, and wanted to try as hard as possible to destroy everything that it did. Not saying that it absolutely was, but the way that the film is written, and how straight up apathetic and bitter the movie is, I'm saying that it feels as if this is the case. And what they decided to do is disregard the original movie's message about how Ohana means family, and that family should always stick together. Which also leads back into me talking about how horribly that this movie messed up the sibling bond between Lilo and Nani, where now, nothing that they do to emphasize their care around each other feels genuine at all. There are only 2 actual moments where they show that they care about each other, 2 of which were directly lifted from the original movie. But the rest of the time, they don't really show any of the chemistry all that much. In this movie, it's not Nani who took Lilo to get a dog, it was her neighbor instead. And instead of Lilo using Ohana means family, and that family should never be forgotten when Nani was about to kick Stitch out of the house, Lilo now uses this as a guilt-tripping method, while Stitch is still causing mayhem, topped off with the fact that Nani says Ohana doesn't mean anything, and that Lilo should just start living in reality. But all of this pales in comparison to what they do in the ending. Good God, the ending of this movie is atrocious. Like, it's literally up there with the ending of Ivan the Incredible, and having an ending that just solidifies every single problem that the movie has. Definitely the second worst ending in a movie I reviewed so far. Basically, after Stitch gets to stay in exile with his newfound family, just like what happens in the original film, the remake decides to change this, where Lilo gets taken away, and Nani goes off to follow her dreams in marine biology. So basically, the movie that is a remake to an animated film that had a message that families should always stick together, decided to pull a Ralph Breaks the Internet in Toy Story 4, and basically having said characters split apart from each other, and the movie does not see this as a problem. Plus, even ignoring the original film's context, in that the film basically ended with Lilo being in custody with Nani, ending with the other aliens being a part of her family too, this ending is still very bad. Because the entire point of the movie was supposed to be that Nani was trying to make sure that Lilo doesn't get taken away from her, so to have that happen anyway was a complete waste of time. And you could literally skip out on this movie and you would miss nothing. And also, Lilo is completely unfazed by this, further showing how badly they destroyed the message that the original movie was trying to go for.
Ohana means family. Family should always stick together and never be forgotten.
Well, according to this movie, Ohana doesn't mean anything unless it's used as a tool to try and manipulate someone, but this message doesn't apply to things like caring about your family in a genuine manner and straight up abandoning them. So overall, would I go as far as to say that Lilo and Stitch is the worst movie I reviewed so far? No. Heck, I don't know if I'd put it as the worst Disney remake, considering the fact that I haven't watched a lot of them. Even in regards to animated movies, including other Disney films, I've seen movies with much more harmful content in them, such as Ivan the Incredible and Raya and the Last Dragon, and others do have worse family bonding messages in them like Monster Family. And between the two very bad alien movies movies that basically try to replicate Lilo and Stitch and end up being inferior movies, I'd still take this movie over Lewis and the Aliens, because where this movie is just a soulless remake that destroys the message of the original, Lewis and the Aliens is a pale imitation of Lilo and Stitch that is straight up unpleasant to watch, and is very close to barely even passing as an actual movie with a narrative. But I can see people hating this movie more than that film, because Lilo and Stitch 2025 blatantly disrespects characters that people do legitimately care about. Meanwhile, Lewis and the Aliens was there to exist and exist on its own. But still though, my recommendation for this movie is incredibly obvious. Just avoid this movie and go watch the original instead. You'll have a much better time with it, and if you really want any other Lilo and Stitch products to fall back on, just watch the animated series and watch the straight-to-DVD sequels. Because all this movie is gonna do is taint any memories that you might have had with the original film, and if you are gonna watch it, I implore you to watch the original film first. Because all this movie will do is ruin any memories you might have had with the original, or even worse, makes the franchise look bad for you if you hadn't seen the original. And unlike with Lightyear, where it's pretty difficult to watch Buzz Lightyear of Star Command, due to the fact that John Lasseter hated the show, and the show ended up getting buried as a result, you can still watch the original film, as well as the other products relating to it, as they're available on Disney+. Meanwhile, this movie is definitely not gonna be part of the Ohana anytime soon.
Everything I